Hello, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the World Government Summit COVID-19 and Government webinar series. Today's session is titled Reasonable Leadership in the Age of Uncertainty. Before introducing our esteemed panelists, I would love to remind everyone that we will be taking live Q&A during the session. Please feel free to send in your questions, mentioning the country and organization that you are sending your question in from. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome our esteemed panelists, His Excellency Omar Sultan Al-Olama, Minister of State for Artificial Intelligence and Managing Director of the World Government Summit Organization, and Gavin Patterson, President and Chief Revenue Officer of Salesforce.
Thank you, Reem. It's an absolute pleasure being here, and it's also a pleasure being with a pioneer in many fields like Gavin. I'd like to start by giving just a quick overview and a brief on who Gavin is. For those of you who are not familiar with Gavin, although I do suspect that everyone here is coming for Gavin personally, not the moderator, but Gavin as an individual is a person who has pioneered in many fields. He has been a pioneer in the telecom sector, he's been a pioneer in the marketing sector as well, and sits on the board of industry giants in the airline industry as well, and in the museum space. So he's an all-rounder. I think we can talk about any subject and every subject with Gavin, but we'll try to stick to responsible leadership and technology for this session here. Gavin's today the President and Chief Revenue Officer of not an industry giant, but an industry giant and pioneer, Salesforce, who is a company that really has transformed many of the things that we see and use in our lives today, and really is a company that continues to innovate responsibly. Many companies around the world find it easy for them to make a revenue. I think what makes Salesforce different is that Salesforce has always focused on being a responsible leader in the domain that they operate in. Gavin, it's an absolute pleasure being with you here today.
Good afternoon, Your Excellency, and it is a pleasure to be here as well. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Gavin. One thing I forgot to mention, and this is where I think me and Gavin sit at opposite ends of the spectrum, is that he's an avid fan of Liverpool, and I'm an avid fan of Manchester City. So I think we're going to go head to head, during the coming weeks.
We are. I'm hopeful we'll have won the championship or the Premier League before we play you in about 10 days' time, I think, next week.
I am hopeful, Gavin, that after the session you might change your mind and come to our side of the table. I'd like to start, Gavin, by really setting the context. As we all have gone through this interesting times and this challenging, let's say, era, we're seeing that we are in a period of crises. We're also in a period where we're not just seeing a health crisis, we're also on the beginning, let's say, of an economic crisis. And in general, we as leaders are unaware of what is to come. Now, when looking at all these challenges, and when looking at it as a leader from one of the biggest industry giants in the technology space, what's your view on the lasting business impact of COVID and the current economic situation and the current era that we are in on the future? What do you think is going to be the impact on business?
Well, there's no question about it. We're in a perfect storm in many ways. There's a pandemic crisis, an economic crisis, a climate crisis that isn't getting any easier. And I think many of us are struggling with how to lead in this type of situation. But every single one of us has to ask, what can we do to help others? And how can we think beyond ourselves? Every CEO and every company needs to ask, what can I do to serve all my stakeholders in this situation? So not just shareholders, but employees, customers, the communities in which we operate. More than ever, this is about stakeholder management. So I think out of crises comes opportunity, and we will find our way through this. It's going to take bravery. We're going to have to be courageous, but I think we can create a new, more resilient, more inclusive economy, one that ensures that we have long-term health and wellness of citizens built into it. We create jobs, we protect against future shocks like climate change. So I think this is a real opportunity for business to step forward and demonstrate that business can be the greatest platform to change.
Thank you for that, Gavin. I think from a, let's say, a broader umbrella, that really does make a lot of sense. But if we're going to talk about Salesforce specifically, how have you responded to the COVID-19 pandemic and this crisis? What are you doing as an entity to support your communities, to really set a benchmark for other business sector players that can actually follow?
Well, we started by thinking about all our stakeholders, and it started with our employees and their health and safety, thinking about our customers, on how we could help our customers manage through this crisis. You know, for example, if they could move to manage their businesses from their homes and manage them remotely. And we also considered our communities. So we thought about what we need to do to ensure that we're making a contribution to help the wider population get through this crisis. So if I take our employees, I'll give you just one example. You know, we were absolutely concerned about our employees' mental health. So we communicated every single day to ensure that everybody felt part of the wider team through this period, and that we thought about the sort of situations that people were facing where they were living and with their families, because not everybody has a great place to work at home, and some have some very challenging situations at home. For example, in many cases, parents were doing homeschooling, for example. So I think that was important. We also made a commitment that for 90 days there would be no layoffs, so that people had some sense of job security, and that we would be reflective before making any wider decisions. And then when it came to our customers, we worked on the technology. Now the good news is Salesforce is built on the cloud, so you can use it anywhere. But we wanted to make sure that we had a series of particularly relevant solutions that were built on the Salesforce platform that allowed you to migrate, or customers to migrate to run their businesses remotely for this. And those services were called Salesforce Care, and they were free and easy to deploy rapidly by employees, customers, and partners. And then finally, on communities, Salesforce has always been a leading light, as you know, Your Excellency, in ensuring that business does good in the communities it operates in. And this has been no exception. So we've made a number of philanthropic grants, in fact, over $24 million during this period. And the second thing we did was build a supply chain to ensure that hospitals and key workers got access to PPE materials and clothing, so that they could protect themselves, because there was a real shortage in many of the places that we operate. So using our supply chain nous and capabilities, we were able to secure PPE and distribute it to a number of hospitals and for care workers around the Salesforce network. So there are just three examples of how we were able to react.
That genuinely does embody responsible leadership, and I must commend you for your efforts on trying to be a beacon for other companies in this time. I'd like to touch upon something that you mentioned here, which is work from home. And I know that many leaders, especially leaders that might be part of this conversation or leaders from around the world, want to get the equation right. How do you allow people to work from home effectively while at the same time ensuring that there isn't someone that is just sitting around being idle and you're paying their salaries? Is there any magic formula? Is there anything that you guys were able to crack to ensure that you're able to get people to work effectively from home that you'd like to share with the audience?
I think the key to it is probably two things in particular. One is ensuring that people don't feel isolated; they remain part of a community. That we over communicated. So, for example, our CEO Mark Benioff hosts a weekly all hands call. I hold an all hands call for my team as well, just to ensure that our colleagues have a connection back into the business, even if they're not going into an office every day. I think that made a difference. I think investing in programs that support employees' mental health, which has been a challenge in many cases, I think that's made a difference. And then finally, it's using the Salesforce suite of software, which is designed to be, designed in a way that you can run it off almost any PC or phone. So it's very light on code. It's all in the cloud. So in many ways, there's no reason why colleagues across the business can't get on with their job on a day-to-day basis. In many ways, the limitation has been our customers able to talk to us. For the first few weeks of the crisis, in many cases, and completely understandably, they were focused on moving their operations so that they could continue to operate remotely. And in some situations, where there were no revenues coming in, they had to focus on replanning the business and working out how they could conserve cash. But what we've seen as we've come out of that is that businesses are engaging in digital transformation discussions with us. They want to get our expertise. And certainly there is, we think, no better partner for digital transformation than Salesforce, particularly in how you manage your relationships with your customers.
So if I can try to condense or summarize everything you said, it's about effective communication and engagement, both internally and externally, with your employees to ensure that they are engaged and they know exactly what's going on and their role in the bigger, let's say, sphere of things, while at the same time making sure that your customers and partners are able to work with you in this time to ensure that everyone is all hands on deck.
I mean, the key thing, Your Excellency, is communication. I think more than anything, as I reflect over the last few weeks, if you spend a lot of time communicating with with colleagues, I would double it or even triple it. I think it's very easy for people to feel isolated when they're not part of the community of working in an office. And in many cases, people couldn't leave their own home. There were some very challenging situations. There are some challenging situations. People with young families where they've had to take on responsibility for homeschooling and they have to do a job. Is one example. I think it's equally as difficult for young people who live on their own and were completely socially isolated through this period as well. So I think, recognizing these are completely uncharted territories, recognizing that the connection that people have with their employer is very much, in many cases, it's one of the most important relationships in their life, and that we have a responsibility to help our colleagues through the change, and that connecting on a regular basis has been absolutely key to that.
Absolutely. To try to move on to a more positive note, we know that everyone's talking about the crisis and everyone's talking about the road to the crisis. If we're going to talk about recovery, what role do you think technology plays in supporting businesses to recover beyond COVID? So we might be actually out of the woods, or some people think that there might be another, let's say, outbreak of the pandemic. But let's assume that today we've reached the end of the pandemic and the beginning of the crisis, the economic crisis, or maybe if that doesn't come as well, the end of that. What can we do with technology to help businesses recover?
Well, I think for a technology provider like us, who specializes in digital transformation in many ways, the key is always the key to this is always about remaining relevant to your customers. So to start with, as I mentioned, it was all about stabilizing the business, helping customers operate their business remotely using things like Salesforce Care as a way of doing that. As we go through this phase, which is probably the reopen phase, if you like, in many societies, customers are looking to us for applications and advice on how to open their office safely. So in many ways, closing the office is the easy part of things. You just switch off the light and everybody goes home. How do you manage people back into the office in a way that is safe when social distancing is still going to be very much part of the way we go about our lives for many months to come? So there's no way of getting everybody into the lift, the elevator at the same time. Within the office itself, there's got to be a gap between desks. You've got to change the cleaning regime in many places, and to be able to schedule that and do so in a way that is efficient. That is one of the applications that we've built into work.com that works on the Salesforce platform. So that's an example of how we're, I think, remaining relevant to the reopen phase. And then, as I said in my opening comments, I'm sure we will come out of this. It may not be a direct path. It may not go as smoothly as we'd like to believe. It might well be that we have a second peak later in the year, but we will come through it. And I think one of the things that is very clear to me is that customers are realizing that digital transformation needs to be accelerated rather than slowed down. So as they look at their CapEx, they look at where they're spending their money for investment. What I'm seeing is customers are protecting and indeed increasing investment in digital transformation. And they recognize that actually the world we revert to, if you like, is not going to be the same as the world we've come from. And that a digitally enhanced experience is going to be fundamental to that, which is why I think companies such as Salesforce are going to become increasingly important.
I completely agree, and I think that technology is one key facet, but there's also, if we're going to talk about responsible leadership, it's also making sure that your business is sustainable. And what we've seen through this crisis is, in the beginning of the crisis, when everything was closed down for a month, we saw companies that were cash crunched, that started to lay off people, that weren't able to sustain even 1 month of the lockdown. And if anything, that probably is because of irresponsible leadership or irresponsible planning, if I may, because sometimes you need to really be planning for the rainy day. If we can actually go back, and if you can actually give business leaders a piece of advice and tell them how they can build back a better, let's say, recovery plan or a more sustainable plan for their business for future pandemics, what do you think they should be doing?
It's an excellent question, Your Excellency, and one that I think many leaders are thinking about at the moment. I mean, at its fundamental level, I think looking at our risk registers as companies and ensuring that we are looking at those so-called black swan risks, which are highly unlikely, low likelihood of happening, but ultimately can be devastating if they do. We are living through a black swan risk at the moment. Even 3 months ago in Davos, this pandemic didn't feature in the top 10 risks. And look how far we've come in, or how much it's changed in that 3 month period. So I think it will require really understanding risk management and putting more emphasis on what to do in some of those black swan situations, and pressure testing and fire drilling the business to ensure that we're prepared for that. And making sure that if something happens, we can, as a business, we can manage our way through it, so that we don't expose ourselves to risks that aren't manageable. I think what has been interesting to me is that many companies who were slow on digital transformation, and in some cases didn't actually have a digital strategy for their customers, have suddenly realized that not only are they missing out on a fundamental change in customer behavior, but probably more significantly, they are exposed to a risk like this when if we can't see people face to face for a period of time and no revenues come in because you're only dependent on what is a human contact, then you're going to expose your business quite significantly. So I'm seeing businesses that were, should we say, digital deniers, very quickly making a commitment to invest so that they can deal with a situation like this, and they can have a direct relationship with their customers if it was to happen in the future. I think then more broadly, one of the things we all have to reflect on is we need to build a better world on the back of this, a world which addresses inequalities, ensures that we're tackling issues like climate change and we're investing in green energy. We're addressing, we're making the world a more inclusive place overall. And I think business has an opportunity now to really play much more of a leadership role going forwards. The amount of stimulus that has gone into economies around the world to manage the crisis means that I think more than ever, business will need to step up to drive the recovery, ensuring that we're building towards full employment again. We're ensuring that where there's been a break in education that has particularly disadvantaged one group of the population, that we're looking at ways to addressing that and helping those children catch up. That we are investing going forwards in accelerating a zero carbon economy. So I think it is, going back to an earlier theme, it is a crisis, but I'm sure many leaders on the call today will have come across these, been in a situation of crisis in the past, and often it is a situation when you have your best, your best work in many ways, and you find your greatest opportunities. It forces decisiveness, and it forces priority setting, and often you can think most clearly in these types of situations. So, it is no doubt about it, it's going to be tough, but I remain very optimistic about how we'll come out of this a better world and a better civilization.
Absolutely. A good friend of mine, I was talking to him a while back, and he said that this crisis has really shown the world businesses as they are. When the economy is good, sometimes the economy just carries you. So you're able to sustain and to grow because the economy itself is performing very well. But in the times of a crisis, you really understand which is a well-oiled machine versus which company is really lucky enough to have survived and today is falling apart. Now, I think as a takeaway, technology and digitization of services and allowing people to get your services digitally are important. But I also think that holistically, a company needs to think of unforeseen circumstances as something that is possible and should always plan for a rainy day, whether it's going to be something that lasts a month or 6 months, whether it's going to be a pandemic or an economic crunch. And, it's always better to be over-prepared than under-prepared. And this is what most people discount. They think that being prepared means that, you're being extra cautious. But it's better for you to survive rather than, survive when the economy is good and suffer when the economy is bad. So thank you very much for sharing your insights on that. moving beyond that, now, if we're going to talk about governments, we are the World Government Summit, we cater to this audience, and many people might be asking, so if you are a responsible leader in business, and if you do have this view, what's your view on the role of business in society, and the role of business leaders and what they should be doing to support governments moving forward? What are your thoughts on that? Well,
I think fundamental to the way Salesforce look at this, and I certainly look at this, is that business should be and can be the greatest platform for change. At a fundamental level, in terms of educating people, creating jobs, taking a leadership on things like climate change, ensuring that everybody is prepared for the future with digital skills, ensuring that we build a more inclusive society that doesn't leave anybody behind. All these are things where business leaders, I think, should not just have a voice, but create the right or deliver the right actions and create the right programs to make change happen and take responsibility for it. Yes, we should be working with governments. There's no question about that. We're stronger together. But ultimately, I don't think we should wait for governments to do things. There are many things that are within our own control where we can take a leadership position. And increasingly, I think shareholders are recognizing that for businesses to really perform over the long term and thrive, they need to take account of all stakeholders as part of that equation. Of course, we're in the business of making money, and without making money, we can't do good things. They are intimately linked in many ways. But if we want to make good money over the long term, we need to make sure we look after colleagues, employees, customers, the communities that we operate in, and ensuring that we are seen as as good citizens who do the right thing and are making a positive contribution to the world. So I think this is a real moment, I think, in that respect. A lot of companies talk about doing things in this area, but this is a time for action, and a time when everybody, I think, needs to look at what they're doing and really reflect on whether they're doing enough for their customers, their employees, and the communities, as well as their shareholders.
Definitely. We've been getting a lot of questions, so I'll jump into those if you allow me. And I'll try to conclude with something that I'll ask you later on. It might be related to football, but I can't guarantee it. We have a question from Egypt, from a gentleman that's asking, for investors planning to invest in certain industries, should they go ahead with their plans or wait? And why, in your opinion?
It's difficult for me to give financial advice. And so I wouldn't consider myself an expert in any way. What I can say is the business that I'm involved in Salesforce, I think is extremely well placed to play a leading role in the way that the world gets transformed over the next few years. There are others as well, so it's not an exclusively held position by Salesforce. But if I look at what our core business is, in terms of helping customers manage their businesses and align their businesses behind their customers, ensuring that their customers are getting better service, getting better products, have a better overall customer experience using Salesforce as a way of running your business, I think that is going to become more important, not less important in the future. So, I will duck the question a little bit. I don't want to give financial advice, but what I can say is that I think a company like Salesforce is extremely well placed to play an important role in the future.
So, pun intended, you don't want to be accountable. So we have another
Just know
question.
my limitations.
We have a question from the UK, which says, how can one juggle responsible leadership with the dissemination of information to the public within the constraints of confidentiality, in your opinion?
Sorry, can you repeat the question, Your Excellency? I didn't quite catch the beginning.
So from what I understood is they're asking, how can you be a responsible leader and disseminate information and work with the public while at the same time adhering to constraints of confidentiality? Or no, I wouldn't say privacy is probably the right word. It's not confidentiality. It might be privacy, I think.
Well, it's a very tricky balance to get right. At the end of the day, as a business, you want to be transparent, and you want to be ethical, and you want to be values driven, and you want to create value for your customers. And those are the sort of principles by which you run your business. There are going to be times when there is information that you can't release to the public because it's market sensitive, and you can't be constantly updating the market on a daily basis on your performance. So I think a practical compromise is to update the market every quarter or every 6 months, or when something significant happens that can be market affecting. I think that is a sensible way of doing things. Then with respect specifically to privacy, I think we've got to be really clear. The data around a customer is the customer's to decide what to do with. So you have to gain their permission if you're going to use it in any way. That's just good business practice. Ensuring that you run your business that way, that you get the right permissions, you're meeting the required regulation, you're cognizant and living by the laws in the markets that you operate in. These are table stakes, I think, for running a successful business these days. So to answer the question in summary, it is a balance, but if you're going to tilt one way, it is better to be more transparent than less transparent. It's better to ask for more permissions than less permissions, and it is better to err on the side of being more ethical than less.
That's an excellent answer, and I think it does give people reassurance when working with a technology pioneer that does believe in this, that we would rather give more privacy than less privacy and more transparency than less transparency. We have a question from the UAE, which is stating, to what extent should leaders seek to design their new normal or rather allow it to unfold? Because leaders are going to be asked to make bets, to make changes. Should they seek these changes or wait for them to happen at this time period?
This is a really interesting question, Your Excellency, and one that I think business leaders grapple with constantly in crisis situations and times when there aren't crises. I guess my own perspective on it over the years is sort of, I think it sort of gets to this sort of position, which is, I think you need to take a position on things. I think you need to not be completely beholden to events or circumstances around you. I think you need to ultimately make markets and anticipate customer needs. So, put another way, it's, in my experience, customers very rarely tell you what they need directly. It is much more of an iterative process where you listen to what their challenges are and what their frustrations are, and what they'd like to do, and then you come back with an idea of how to meet those. But you have to. They don't tell you to launch a new piece of software. You need to identify an issue that they have and create the software to meet that, and then ask them whether or not it meets them. That's the way the process works. So you have to anticipate the future. You have to shape the future. You have to be a thought leader in creating that future. But at the same time, you always need to be able to course correct. So, nobody has 2020. Well, everybody has 2020 hindsight, but nobody has 2020 vision in many ways. So the comment I made about anticipating the impact of this pandemic is a perfect example of one. If you think of the people that go to Davos every year, and in many ways this situation wasn't really discussed in any sort of to any sort of extent, would demonstrate that how difficult it is to predict the future. So if you are going to try and shape it, if you are going to come up with ideas that are relevant to your customers, you must always be able to quickly adapt or course correct if they're not right. So it is being able to experiment but have a very quick cycle time to iterate around that, and be prepared to make a number of bets so that you're not dependent on just one bet coming off. So it is, in my experience, it may sound an odd thing to people spend an awful lot of time on strategy and not enough time on execution. And in my experience, strategy is something you should spend time on, and there are some big decisions you've got to get right, don't get me wrong. But in truth, it has to, good strategy is always relevant to the context it's operating in. And you need to be able to adapt it as situations change. Far more important is when you execute with absolute excellence, and ensure that you follow through and deliver on the promise that you've made to your customers. So I find that execution is often not given the credit it really ought to be in terms of its importance to success.
So execution is unsung, unfortunately. And,
unsung, yeah.
Strategy is given a lot of credit. I think what you're saying here was you should be prepared to jump off the cliff, but have a parachute with you just in case, to ensure that you don't.
That's a brilliant analogy. I love it.
So I don't know if this is, to be honest, I don't know if this is a recommendation or a question or an idea, but we have a statement coming in from India, and you can feel free to answer this or just completely dodge it. That's saying if you considered launching a low-budget version of your Salesforce CRM, targeting SMEs and small business industries to meet their requirements. If you'd like to share something there, then we can take this. If not, it's an idea that you can keep in mind.
It's a very interesting idea. If you look at where Salesforce has come from, it's not come. It's come from the SMB market. That's where it was first launched, and that even today in many markets, that's the real heart of the customer base. That said, in the US, we've launched a product called Essentials, which is a self-service version of Salesforce that's designed for companies with sort of 1 to 20 employees. That is doing very well. In fact, it's doing particularly well through the pandemic. So, there is the possibility that we expand that further. We look to see whether or not the markets outside of the US where that would play particularly well. And India might be one of them, of course.
Great. I think the person who threw that question out should get the credit for that. I don't know what their name is. We have another question from Pakistan, which I think is a philosophical question, but at the same time, talking about responsible leadership, it's quite important. And the question goes by saying digital solutions are on the rise since COVID-19, and it's been accelerated. And this has led to major reduction in the need for manpower in the previous period and the coming period as well. And this person as well says that he does not expect it to go back to normal. The question is, what should be the leader's role in saving manpower resources and getting them back to work quickly? What are the solutions for displacement of manpower that you see?
Well, I think this is a really big question, and it's bigger than me. It's bigger than Salesforce. I think it's bigger than any one country. One of the consequences of digitalization is artificial intelligence, which I know is an area that's of particular interest to you, is that it means that the people intensity of many businesses is reducing. That creates problems for governments, that creates problems for societies in general, and it can lead to social unrest. A world where everybody is gainfully employed, is feeling as though they have the same opportunities in life, irrespective of where they've come from, and one where actually you have the prospects of combining hard work with education and a bit of luck, but you can progress in the world. That's the sort of world I think everybody wants to be a part of. In driving digital transformation, I think leaders have a responsibility to ensure that people who are displaced have new opportunities. And the key to that is education skills. So I think one of the things that Salesforce does in this area, which I think is, as somebody who's relatively new to the company, I think brilliant, is something called Trailhead, where you can take online courses from a beginner status to some pretty serious, pretty high level, highly respected courses in digital technology. You can do it obviously all remotely, and it is available to companies to deploy in their amongst their workforce. So if you've sort of got halfway through your career and realized that your skills are not going to be as relevant in the future, you can retrain yourself. You can become more digitally oriented, digitally savvy, so that as new jobs come on board, you're better placed to take advantage of them. And what I would say is there is a huge shortage of people with basic digital skills. So the one thing I think governments can do is ensure that every child that is going through the education system, whether they consider themselves a computer scientist or an English major, everybody should be taught how to do basic data manipulation, basic low-code programming, and general digital skills to ensure that actually they're relevant to more jobs in the future. So, it used to be computer science was critical to any job in IT. In the future, I think everybody's job will have some form of IT or digital skills within it. So you're going to have to know, the core digital skills in the same way that you have to be able to read and write to go ahead in life. And I think that's the way we're going to go. So I think companies have a responsibility to help with that retraining, number one. And number two, I think in shaping curriculum or curricula at schools and universities, ensuring that actually young people are come prepared with those skills already when they enter the workplace. Those are the two areas I think we can make a difference.
And if we're just going to go to Trailblazer for a second, is this an open to public platform? Is this a paid service? Can a government or an entity, opt to use this, or is it something that you leave to your customers or you have internally?
All of the above. There's some free elements to it. It is a paid service when it comes to corporates. They're not hugely expensive. Obviously, we need to be able to run it. ensure that it's got high availability and good content on it, and it is properly serviced. But I think it is fundamental to governments and businesses to take advantage of it. And as I say, I think members of the public can use it as well.
That's great. I think we'll look into it, and I'll be more than happy to use the UAE to reskill and retool people if we can work together on that. So we'll have a look. I have one final question from the audience, and then I'll jump to a final concluding question for myself, but we'll take this first. The question says, I like the word compromise that you used, Gavin, but how far can you compromise your product and the quality of your service to keep customers' confidence, mostly when profit calculation tends to get more attention than keeping social value? Where does responsible leadership come to play in this?
Well, this is the $64 million question. Maybe it's $64 billion question these days, but it is an art, I would say, more than a science. More than a mathematical equation. It is about having a judgment that allows you to balance short versus long term, and ensure that you support all your stakeholders as part of your decision to price or invest in a product. Good shareholders, good investors really understand that. They recognize that, sometimes in the short term, profits need to be sacrificed to invest, and they're prepared to support you and make that sacrifice themselves, provided that at some point it's clear that they are able to make a return in exchange for foregoing profits in the short term. So I think, in my experience, it is, this is what leaders have to do. This is why they are leaders. It's about making the judgment call that weighs up the competing interests of different groups. That on a good day, you're able to find that sweet spot where they all overlap, and you can find a way to thread the Swiss cheese, if you like, and go through the whole and make sure that all components, all stakeholders are in some way satisfied by your solution. And I think that's the real balance.
So pray and wish for good stakeholders and shareholders. I think that's the only thing that one can do here. I'd like to conclude with one final question that is a question to Gavin, not to Salesforce. And this is you wearing your own hat. What is one of the most underappreciated technologies that you think will come to the forefront in the coming years? Something that is not getting enough attention, but you think should be getting more attention?
Well, I think artificial intelligence is still in its infancy. I think as an aid to making decisions, at removing some of the human error that comes from analyzing data and the human bias, I think artificial intelligence has a huge contribution to make. So I don't know of any business process that could not benefit from having an AI component to it. So, it does get a lot of publicity, so maybe it doesn't meet that criteria. Yeah. But do I think we are in any way overblowing the opportunity? No. Do I think it is mature and it's reached its peak? Certainly not. So, if I was to say, from my perspective, where do I think there is still a huge way to go and a huge opportunity ahead of us? I would say AI.
Thank you very much, Gavin. Best of luck on the football field. I did promise you that I'm going to mention football one last time. I would hope that you give us a run for our money, but I'm inclined to say that we're going to win.
Well, next season we start again, and you're an excellent team, and whoever gets above Man City generally wins the Premier League. So hopefully it will be Liverpool next season as well, but it's going to be one hell of a competition.
May the best team win, sir. Thank you very much for taking the time and for sharing your insights. It's been an absolute pleasure, Gavin. I look forward to seeing you in person when things are better. And also, I look forward to people who have been part of this conversation to take the insights that were generated and really apply them. Because as you said, strategy is one thing, but execution is the unsung hero that we need to focus on. Thank you very much. And I'll hand over to Reem to take this for a close.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you, Gavin, for such an insightful session. I think building on everything that was said today, it's kind of like this big complex compass in the sense. So we had talks about sustainability, and we had talks about technology. We also had talk about well-being of your actual employees and your actual citizens from a government's perspective. So how does this all collectively come into pretty much building the next generation of responsible leaders and also the current leaders that we have today? So I think it's a really, we can't look at this as one separate block. It's a whole combination of sustainability, human well-being, on being opportunistic. And I think one thing even coming in from even the Q&A today was there was a very opportunistic approach to even the people online today. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you, Gavin, for your time, and hopefully we all meet in person very soon. Stay safe and take care.